at a book by a guy named Patrick Deneen, D-E-N-E-N, and his book is called Why Liberalism Failed. And he's using the term liberalism not in any political sense, although there's quite a bit about politics in this book. His use of the term liberalism is basically more of a classical understanding of liberty. So, so when we think about liberalism as he wants us to do in this text, he wants us to think about what is liberty, what is freedom. So our country, our government system is built on this on the idea of liberty, or a liberal government where people are free. The government is for the people, by the people, right? This idea of liberty. And so, how do we use our liberty appropriately? His comment, obviously, in the title of his book, Why Liberalism Failed, basically points at the fact that our government system has been structured and built, constructed in a way to protect the freedom of all people. Deneen very passionately and incisively deconstructs, to use that term, he breaks down, he claims that our hope to create a liberal or free society has failed. Not because of anything the Founding Fathers did, not because perhaps even the government system itself is bad, but because people have misunderstood the virtue and the value of what liberty is for. We have become a society addicted to satisfying all of our desires. We have become a society who believes that our freedom is a tool for us, a gift for us, to allow us to satiate every desire we can possibly think of. And this is the good life. And he says that is a misconception, a horrifying, debilitating, inhuman use of liberty. To use liberty to simply satisfy desires turns each man into a beast. He's quoting Aristotle in that way. I guess I just quote Aristotle there too. There have been a lot of people who have criticized this book, and I've read a few critics about him. They usually focus on the idea that Patrick Deneen is contending for, pushing a kind of a pre-modern, almost a monarchist system, as opposed to a democracy. I feel like it's a gross misreading of the text, over-politicizing it. In many ways, this text is very critical of both Republican and Progressive Party, the Democratic Party in America. He's critical in the sense that he says the Republican Party, the conservative liberals, you say, the conservatives have sought to create a market for everything, irregardless of how that system might degrade people. And so everything is for sale, everything is at your fingertips, everything you should be able to buy, anything you want and enjoy, anything you want. And this is kind of the Republican, he's generalizing, the Republican view of liberty. The Democrat side would say we want to abolish, in many ways, create a single playing field with no culture. He calls the Progressive Party in America an anti-cultural party that wants to destroy all cultural difference. And so, that's or others like that, defy and destroy cultures that may have a value for a child in the womb. They believe that there is a child actually in the womb. Oh, the little letter there. Cute. And so the two parties equally at fault in pushing for an agenda that is destructive for the human being. Oh, that is so cute. Yes! Oh. How are you, buddy? Can you hear me? Oh.
I haven't muted, sorry.
Oh, so cute. Just wants to be a part of the party. I love it.
With everything you're saying, both of them.
I love it. So, let's see. Let me give you a few hot takes here on this. A few key quotes. says this: liberty was fundamentally reconceived, even if the word was retained. Liberty had long been believed to be the condition of self-rule that forestalled tyranny, within both the polity and the individual soul. So in the community, but also for the individual, right? Liberty was thus thought to involve discipline and training in self-limitation of desires. That is a key point. Liberty was classically thought to involve discipline and training in self-limitation of desires and corresponding social and political arrangements that sought to inculcate corresponding virtues. So liberty, again, originally conceived as, a key part of liberty was conceived as involving discipline to train in the self-limitation of desires. This is one of the great values of liberty. Correspondingly, he says that there are social and political arrangements that would help people in a society to understand that their liberty, best conceived and best employed, is to encourage virtue and foster the arts of self-government. And again, by self-government, he's talking about, among other things, self-discipline, governing of self. Classical and Christian political thought was self-admittedly more art than science. It relied extensively on the fortunate appearance of inspiring founding figures and statesmen who could uphold political and social self-reinforcing virtuous cycles. To break that down, so in a best-case scenario, in a liberal system where freedom is given to the individuals, there are inspiring founding figures, obviously we have those, who uphold both political and personal virtue. Yeah. Sadly, we've definitely lost that in our society today on both sides of the spectrum. That made me think of our past 18 presidents, and really none of them live up to this idea of upholding political and social self-reinforcing virtuous cycles, and acknowledge the likelihood of decay and corruption as an inevitable feature of any human institution. So again, in that, just to break down the last part there, I love that comment. That those founding fathers, those founding figures that really are a key part of a liberal society, those we look back at and say, okay, there's some real good virtue, there's some good modeling. Even those figures, though, recognize the likelihood of decay of any institution because of human sin and human depravity. And so the importance of that, I think, for Deneen is that we're constantly recognizing that we are flawed people. And flawed people with lots of freedom are going to do some really grotesque things, both to themselves and to those around them. And so having this sense of a healthy sense of fear of self, recognizing my sin is always before me, and therefore I lean heavily and heavily on Christ for any goodness. I feel like that figures prominently under the surface of this text, and how important that is, as opposed to how do you put it? He would say that perspective of my sin is always before me. As a depraved individual, I have to be very careful with how I use my liberty. That contrasted with an optimism and a confidence in science. And he really kind of goes off on this idea of the confidence we put into science. We put confidence into science when, as say the Republican Party, wants to just drill and break down in aggressive ways our natural resources with no sense of the future, no sense of responsibility for the future. We are aggressively pursuing the destruction and the use and the consuming of natural resources because we want to satisfy every desire. I want to have an awesome screen on my iPhone, and so who cares if we have to mine beautiful plains and plateaus in Mongolia and create massive seas of toxic fumes for the Mongolians, as long as I can have a nice clear screen for my iPhone. It's okay. It's fine. I don't care what happens to those Mongolians. I'll never have to meet them anyway. And in fact, what we can trust is the fact that science will eventually catch up, and science will fix those toxic lakes that are destroying Mongolian people for generations. Science will fix it. So we put our faith in science. And so Deneen critiques this, saying we're putting far too much faith in science just so that we can consume irresponsibly and without any sense of discipline. So you have, again, this sense our sin is always before us. We are depraved, sinful people. We have to be very careful with our liberty and discipline ourselves and our desires versus, oh no, man, let the hair down. You go and you get what you want. You pursue every last desire that you have, and science, and then on the left, the government will fix all the problems, right? Fix all the problems. Because if you get into a relationship and you're involved sexually, we'll just criminalize anyone who you think may have violated you. But you just go ahead and you just enjoy yourself. Because the government will come in and save the day when all hell breaks loose in your sex life or your relationship life or your married life. Even if you have a child you didn't want, we can take care of that. That's what abortion is for, right? Science fixes everything, and the government fixes everything. So science will fix everything for the Republican side, the generalizing. The liberal side like that too. But the liberal side, the Democrats, right? The Democrats say the government will come and fix the day. The most important thing for both, Deneen criticizes, is the fact that you have no supply of fuel to permit nearly infinite choices. The twin outcomes of this effort, the depletion of moral self-command and the depletion of material resources, make inevitable an inquiry into what comes after liberalism. I'll break that down simply. I know you probably understand that, but let me just what I read there. So liberalism, as a titanic wage of ancient norms of behavior, could be lifted. He talks a lot about the importance of culture, tradition. Right? This is him kind of showing his hand as a bit as a conservative thinker in some ways. But also just some of the things that he values. He's clearly not a Republican. He's clearly not a Democrat. He's thinking at a level that is far superior, and I think this is what I love about this book. He's drawn me out of the distractions of Democrat or Republican labels to a place where I say, okay, there's a lot more going on here than just a two-party system in America. There is a demonic, in many ways, he doesn't use that term, but what seems a demonic force at play in both parties that are leading us toward a destructive place, and have already led us to a very destructive place in the way we see ourselves and the way we understand freedom. So part of liberalism is that now we can throw out all those ancient norms of behavior in the name of a new form of liberation. The sexual revolution, all the different revolutions of thought, we have deconstructionism, all these new forms allow us to throw out old forms of thought, and which come with a certain sense of discipline. We can throw that out because, as he says, conquering nature. We're going to conquer. We already have conquered nature in so many ways. We've figured out ways that if you have an unwanted pregnancy, take a pill. How convenient is that? That's called conquering nature. It's putting nature inside the grip of your hand and saying, you do whatever you want. Because if you have consequences, you just take a little soba pill. That's a little Charles Huxley, but you just take a little pill and it just solves everything. Science solves everything. So we conquer nature, and that supplies the fuel to permit nearly infinite choices. And who doesn't love infinite choices and the opportunity and the right to go after any choice that I want without any consequence? This is the great lie, the great deception that Deneen's text really kind of pulls the curtain back on and says, this is what's behind the curtain. Democrat, Republican, it's all kind of nonsense in some ways. It's all a distraction from a greater sense of evil, a greater pervasive deception that has come over this idea of freedom and the way we're dealing with freedom. It will eventually destroy us, and it is in the process of destroying who we are as children of God.
So there's one thing I'd like to throw out there, and it's what you're kind of talking about with the party system, and it's like, no, we're talking about something bigger here. My father-in-law, Randy Strom, I think 2 reader retreats ago, presented the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah.
And it had a principle in there of MU, M-U. And do you remember? Does anybody remember that? And so he said, basically, like, that is, I can't answer your question because the premise is wrong. You know, and that's what I feel like sometimes with these political parties. It's like, I can't even answer, you know, who's right here, because it's like the premise, like, we need to go take a step back. We need to look somewhere else, or bigger, or meta, to begin to talk about some of these things. And I appreciate that about this perspective. And it's also working on the experiment of the experiment of what is it like to have a free nation, where, like, free speech, for instance, is so powerful. Not any other country in the world experiences free speech like we do. And, you know, it'd be interesting if we tinkered with that experiment of how could we get better as a society on this government idea, as opposed to, like, entrenching in these parties.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah. To that, I think Deneen would say, far more important than your political party is the health of your intimate community and the culture that you're a part of. Healthy local communities, and this is where he kind of starts to quote Wendell Berry quite a bit. A healthy local community that you are intimately involved in. Again, it's small enough for you to be involved in and influence. That is the essence of regaining, or that's one of the key components of regaining our humanity. As we look at these kind of abstract concepts of what it is to be a Democrat or Republican, it's meaningless, and it's, in many ways, it's a red herring. Well, it draws us beside the point, as opposed to me, and how can I influence that in a very healthy way, and thus be influenced by it in a very direct and helpful way. Kind of goes back to some of our comments earlier about talking about race. We can sit online and chat it up about, oh, I think black people have it okay now. What are they complaining about? Oh, no, black people are every single day they're being pushed out. Okay, how about you go outside and you meet some people and you talk to people and actually have a real relationship instead of just theorizing online? I think that's part of what he's talking about. How do we make things material, going back to Brian's book, how do we get down to the material of community versus kind of the abstraction of politics and a political system that is used?
I think another feature of Deneen's book that I found helpful, he's really talking about anthropology. What do we understand by the term a human being? And what liberalism, the way that Deneen is using it, why liberalism failed is you told a different story. So, in the old world, if I can put it that way, or the pre-liberal world, human beings had some relationship to the divine. There was something outside, above, and beyond us to which we must give an account. So biblically, Adam and Eve are formed for a relationship with God. They are given a task to steward creation into fruitfulness. They're given a command: don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They violate that, and that's the story of human history. What this new wager, what you fundamentally are is an individual. You don't come from anywhere. Your parentage doesn't matter. Your ethnicity doesn't matter. The religion around you. None of that any hold on you. You are an individual. And what that means as an individual is, as John said, you are a creature of desire. You want, more pleasure and less pain. And that's who you are. And so this political theory, you probably heard the phrase social contract theory. So a bunch of individuals, right? That's all we are. We just kind of appear on the scene. And we realize, gosh, if we all just are pursuing all of our desires, we're going to run into one another. It's going to get ugly. So we form a social contract, a mythical thing that actually never happened, where we all got together, shook hands and said, we want a government, here it is. So what he parallels is that both conservative liberals and progressive liberals basically agree that we're fundamentally individuals and we need a strong state to allow us to be individuals. So he says what you find is you find this strange marriage of individualism, which nonetheless requires an increasingly powerful and intrusive state to guarantee my liberty, which has been redefined as the right to do what I want. So that's and both conservatives in our context and liberals are singing off the same score, right? Now, conservatives are going to say, well, we want smaller government until you hit their issues, and it's like we need the government to guarantee your right to do business free from regulation, low taxation. We actually need a bigger government to lower our taxes in a strange way, right? That's part of where we're stuck. And of course, the progressive position is you as an individual your freedom is constantly under threat from big corporations, religious communities, your family, whatever. And so you need the government to constantly be monitoring things so that you are not obligated to or by any of those things. So I thought that was really interesting, the way that individualism, Deneen's analysis says individual and statism are married, and they kind of do it like this. The more individualism, the more we need a powerful and intrusive state to guarantee our individual rights.
One of the things I like about the book,
touch of humor.
Go ahead, Steve.
When I first heard Dennis Peacock talking on this subject, he called it the Enlightenment Continuum, and he said the difference between Republicans and Democrats is the difference between Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
I think he's right. I was going to say...
I remember Peacock saying, I mostly heard him on recording, but I don't think I heard him say this in person, but he said Republicans and Democrats are just two sides of the same coin. And his course, where he was going was there's a third way, which was the kingdom of God. But he really deconstructed the whole thing kind of like Deneen does in his own way. I was hearing...
Real fast, John.
Go ahead.
Deneen says, both main political options of our age must be understood as different sides of the same counterfeit coin.
Peacock would love it. He may have read that book.
He may.
But I don't think that book was published when I heard him say this. When was this one published?
16, I think.
16.
Yeah, it was before that when I heard Peacock say that. But I was hearing when you were talking about science and the attitude that we all tend to fall into sometimes is that science will answer whatever the dilemma is eventually, just give them enough time. They'll come up with a vaccine eventually, hopefully sooner than later. It's going to make everything all better and we'll go back to normal, which probably will never vaccine they come up with will never be that effective. But that's what we like to believe. That's the little fantasy that we like to tell ourselves. And of course, the government and the present administration tries to reinforce that very strongly. Anyway, what I was hearing was, and the whole thing, the whole appeal to individual freedom. You can do whatever you want to, anytime you want to, and you've got unlimited choices and unlimited freedom, and you've got science and government to support you in that process, in that conquest. I was in the garden hearing, you shall, no, you won't surely die, you'll be like God.